we're going to have a tribute to Martin Luther King. And we have our editorial in this week's paper is about King, and it's entitled Dr. King's Legacy Still Relevant. I'm going to read it. This is a quote. I have worked too long now and too hard to get rid of segregation in public accommodations, to turn back to the point of segregating my moral concern. Justice is indivisible, and justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And wherever I see injustice, I'm going to take a stand against it, whether it's in Mississippi or in Vietnam. Martin Luther King on Face to Face on July 1967. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the heroic leader of the civil rights struggle, whose birthday is honored with a federal holiday on January 18th, was put under tremendous pressure to stay silent on the imperialist war against Vietnam. He was told that the only way that the political establishment of his time would pass progressive legislation would be for him not to object to the brutal war against the Vietnamese people. King absolutely refused. Infamous Birmingham, Alabama, Cop Bull Connor, who ordered the brutal assaults on civil rights demonstrators with dogs, fire hoses, clubs, and guns in the early 1960s, is long dead. However, young black men and women will still remain victims today of a racist war by cops from Ferguson to Cleveland, from Chicago to New York, from Oakland to Minneapolis to Los Angeles. Certainly, the brave activists of the Black Lives Movement carry forward King's legacy to this day. And King would have been proud of activists linking the Black Lives Movement struggle with that for immigrant rights, particularly with the current Gestapo-like ICE raids and deportations targeting Central American immigrants who have fled the U.S.-caused turmoil in their home countries. King said that the conditions faced by African Americans who were denied voting rights, equal employment and pay, equal rights to housing, education, and hotel rooms, and who were trapped in a life of poverty were linked to the death and devastation caused by the U.S. military adventure in Vietnam. King was coming to the conclusion that the struggle of workers and oppressed for justice knew no borders before he was struck down by an assailant's bullet in 1968. This is an excerpt from his historic April 4th, 1967 Riverside Church address in New York City. It reads, "There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in the struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, through the poverty program. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the buildup in Vietnam, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as its adventures, like Vietnam, continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic, destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and attack it as such." If you want to follow up on this, it's coming from the nationaljourney.com on January 20th, 2014. U.S. imperialism has never ceased its relentless war drive, whether by open invasion, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, or proxy war, as in Syria, Yemen, or Libya. Trillions are spent to feed the war machine, and millions are killed or driven from their homes, while workers in oppressed communities here face stagnant or starvation wages, evictions, huge college debts, and never-ending cutbacks to social programs like food stamps. In the face of the heroic rebellions against the racist oppression in the black communities that broke out in Watts, in Newark, in Detroit, and elsewhere, King pointed to the true cause and the true target of many struggles. King went on to say at Riverside Church, "I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government." King is now gone, cut down by an assassin's bullet just 12 months after he spoke those words. But his vision of linking all the different struggles against injustice offers a steering example for us today and many lessons.